Next, over this white tunic of faith, he says that faith is a white tunic because we are disguised. The soul is disguised. Disguise means hidden from the enemies. You want really to reach your goal, who is God himself, but you are facing three enemies. How can you escape from these three enemies? You need to be disguised, hiding, if you want, clothed with clothes which don't reveal who you are, so you go through and your enemies will not harm you. Okay, so faith is a white tunic. So these are symbols, if you want, which fit nicely what he wants to explain. Now, as you will see, now we move on to the green garment, or the green clothes of the act of hope. So when I say act of hope, remember we are talking book 3 of Ascent of Mount Carmel. We haven't read it and commented it, but it's this, okay? So as a result of this effort, of this training, of this repetition, the soul reaches a point where she can escape unseen, unnoticed. So next, over this white tunic of faith, the soul now puts on the second color, which is a green vestment. Of course, this is a way to speak. It's not that like we are dressed in green, of course. Now you understand that. By this, as we say, is signified the virtue of hope, wherewith, as in the first case, the soul is delivered and protected from the second enemy, which is the world. Now, again, just to remind you, this is a teaching, if you want, simple, obvious. You find it in the masters in the spiritual life. You find it in monastic teaching. You find it in the Bible, in the New Testament. We have three enemies: the flesh, our sensuality, if you want. We have the devil, and we have the world. And by the world, we mean the ways of the world, the way the world thinks, the way the world acts, and so hopes, and so forth. Okay, so faith falls into the mind, conscious mind, and the enemy faith is capable of beating or escaping from is the devil. Better said, escaping than beating. It's more precise, because the goal is not to beat the devil, but to avoid the devil or to escape from him. And now we are with the memory. Hope falls in the memory. I'm giving you his structure, his anthropological and theological structure. Okay, so he makes the three enemies, the three faculties, and the three colors go together. Okay, so the second enemy is the world here, and we can escape from the world by the act of hope. And for this green color of living hope in God gives the soul such ardor and courage and aspiration to the things of eternal life, that by comparison with what it hopes for therein, all things of the world seem to it to be, as in truth they are, dried and faded and dead and nothing worth. In this long sentence, this is gold. Why? Because he is offering us the practical side of the act of hope. Progressively, you will see the act of hope emerging again in a synthetical, conclusive way, synthetical and conclusive from book 2 of Ascent, book 3 of Ascent of Mount Carmel. So what does the act of hope do? And I think these 2 or 3 paragraphs deserve a study just in itself. Why? Because these are practical aspects of our daily life. He's not just teaching us theory. No, he is showing us when we make the act of hope, how we make it, and what happens when we make the act of hope. This is fundamental, you see, because you always hear about it. You hear about the act of hope. You hear about faith, hope, and love. You read St. Paul, you quote St. Paul, you read a little bit in theology about hope. You read a little bit here and there a book or an article on hope. But here you have the substance of the act of hope, and it's very powerful. And I have to say that the normal preaching, I would say, in the church about hope lost a lot about its purity because of the following. The Council Vatican II in Gaudium et Spes, which is the church in the world, and I'm talking, of course, here back in 65, invited us Christians not to be too closed in ourselves, thinking about our own salvation, personal salvation, and forgetting about the world, forgetting about politics, forgetting about social life, and just being like secluded in our own space. The council says we need to be involved in our world, in what is happening. Of course, this advice was read and lived in many different ways, but I have to say that it affected also the teaching in spiritual life. Why? Because it sort of hinted, it's not the intention of the council, of course, but it was read, and it is easily read as a double level of hope. It's as if the council is saying, instead of looking at eternal life, heaven, avoiding hell, hopefully also avoiding purgatory, working toward heaven, espousing a little bit the reality, the human reality. It doesn't make us like foreigners, but it's the direction that incarnation takes, which is God from above, if so to speak, comes down. And therefore, the council says, get involved. He's not saying change your act of hope, but this, in a way, occurred in the sense that our attention from heaven, our attention from the first way of making the act of hope, sort of dissolved, to the point that if you study well what happened in the 60s and in the 70s, you will notice that talking about heaven, hell, and purgatory disappeared completely. And with it, many other things like sin, confession, priesthood, Eucharist, and so forth. I'm talking about the 60s and the 70s. So I think we need to be aware of two different interpretations of get involved. Of course, we need to get involved. Jesus was involved, fully involved. But Jesus was God. And Jesus kept himself as God and kept himself pure in the world, which is not our case. We need first to be united to Jesus in order to achieve what Jesus achieved. But this is us talking now, not back then in 64, 65. So what I'm trying to say is the following, is that in a way, the act of hope changed direction. Instead of aiming toward God himself, it is aiming toward God's work here on earth, or simply being involved on earth. So what happens is that progressively, the act of hope, the soul, the spirit, the purity of the act of hope sort of dissolved. Sorry if I'm making this analysis, but I'm trying to help you understand why the act of hope we are reading right now is so strong and so different from our imagination, what we believe in. You see, the tragic thing is that we lost a little bit our goal initially, which was heaven. We have been involved in many things. I'm talking about 60s, 70s, 80s. We have been involved in many activities, which is it's not bad per se, but the act of hope itself sort of got muddled with the human hopes, like tomorrow will be better, we need to solve some political issues. Communism was a bit of a huge challenge for the church and so forth. communism stopped more or less. It's still continuing, but more or less in 89. So you see, all this social, political, ideological dimension was involved in our mind with our spiritual life. So we stopped, in a way, daring to aim for God himself purely. This is where I'm getting to. Unconsciously, we stopped aiming for God purely. If you talk today amongst us Catholics, if you talk this language of St. John of the Cross, it's like it's not very audible. Why? Because we are not used to. Let me read again the paragraph. I'm trying to show you how this paragraph is totally alien from our daily program in the parishes, in our Catholic faith, amongst religious, amongst nuns, amongst consecrated people, amongst missionaries, and so forth. Let me read it again. For this green color of living hope in God gives the soul such ardor and courage and aspiration to the things of eternal life. Who has aspirations for the things of eternal life today? So you ask, well, where is it now? Did we forget about heaven? We didn't really forget, but it sort of disappeared. Why? Because our aim became get involved. You cannot not get involved in today's life. You see, I'm talking our language from 64. I'm not blaming the Council Vatican II, and don't drag me in that at all. I'm just explaining a correct advice, how a wrong interpretation of the correct advice was given, which is, okay, let us get involved, but unconsciously, we are not aiming for something. It's blurry, okay? So I'm trying to explain St. John of the Cross in today as well. If we aim properly to things of eternal life, and for him, what is the things of eternal life? From the first page of the Ascent of Mount Carmel, his teaching is very clear. The aim is very clear. Union of love, union with Christ. So you see how different is the program, the St. John of the Cross plan, from our plan. Because if today you say union with Jesus, people will say, well, this is like isolating yourself, making yourself of a little hermit, and this is not being Christian. You will hear that very often now. But from where this comes? It comes from the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, where suddenly we got aware of the existence of the world around us, the progress of the world around us, but then we lost the aim in the middle of all this. Does it mean that we shouldn't be involved? No. You cannot progress in spiritual life if you don't love your neighbor. And I explained it before, reading St. John of the Cross. He says, you want to grow spiritually, apply what St. Paul says in chapter 13 of the 1st of Corinthians, which is love does this, love does that, and so forth. So it's like, I'm quoting him from memory, it's like you are almost pushing God to give himself more. Why? Because the world is composed of human beings. The human beings are saved by Jesus, so you cannot consider them as alien to you. They are part of Jesus. So this is not wrong to say you have to get involved, because this is also Jesus. But when you get involved, how do you get involved? And this is the question. How do you get involved in the world?